This episode is brought to you by Amazon Business. We could all use more time. Amazon Business offers smart business buying solutions, so you can spend more time growing your business and less time doing the admin. I can see why they call it smart. Learn more at amazonbusiness.com.
Icy Hot Pro with 2 max strength pain relievers. Targets multiple pain receptors. Ice works fast. Heat makes it last.
Roger, that's over us. Get right now, over.
Welcome to True Spies, Brief Histories. We're living through an era in which the impact of spies, subterfuge and covert influence is increasingly visible. We're bombarded with news about foreign interference, wartime propaganda and threats from cyberspace. And that's just for starters. But how did we get here? In these bonus minisodes, we'll explore the long history of spycraft. And with the help of our deep bench of espionage experts, we'll bring you up to speed on the past, present and possible future of this ancient profession.
All foreign countries wish to know America's diplomatic and military intentions and capabilities. Ultimately, some classified information, if it got into the wrong hands, could compromise the identity and eventually the lives of American sources.
I'm Joe Foley, series producer for True Spies. And this is a brief history of counterintelligence. Spies have been around forever, so it follows that there's always been a need to catch them in the act, to protect the secrets they set out to acquire. In previous episodes of Brief Histories, we've learned about ancient Egyptian secret police, biblical honey traps, and Tang Dynasty state surveillance, and much more besides, of course. But this time, we're going to skip ahead to an era that feels more of a piece with the world we live in now. A time when our modern concepts of intelligence and counterintelligence were just beginning to crystallise. In the lagoon of Venice, intrigue was a way of life. Long before the city joined a unified Italy, it was a state unto itself, a hub of trade and diplomacy, with external territories and vested interests across the region. So, like any state, it had secrets and enemies. Now that side of things was looked after by a group called the Council of Ten, first established in the 1300s in response to a failed coup against the Doge of Venice. Made up of Venetian nobles, the council combined secret policing, diplomatic surveillance and internal security, and was highly organised in a way that other European powers took centuries to imitate. By the 1600s, they'd become a sort of shadow government, and woe betide any foreign spy discovered lurking in Venice's dark alleys and murky waterways. But Venice was a waning power at this point. New Portuguese trade routes had bypassed its channels into the lucrative eastern spice trade, and centuries of war with the Ottoman Empire had drained its coffers even further. In the face of all that, the Council of Ten became increasingly paranoid. All that wealth, all that power, they could feel it slipping away like a corpse into the dark lagoon. Suspicion became tantamount to guilt, and spies, like leeches on the aforementioned corpse, were pretty high up on the list of people to deal with. In the year 615, a Venetian diplomat came home. His name was Antonio Foscarini, and he'd just finished a term as ambassador to England. Now, Foscarini, in the manner of most good diplomats, was a personable guy. He made a lot of friends in England, and he kept in touch with them. But the Council of Ten saw England as a rival, if not an enemy outright. Where Venice was Catholic, England was Protestant. Where the city-state's territory had shrunk, England's was growing. So Foscarini's English pen pals didn't go down well with the Council of Ten. So they put him under surveillance. Informants, usually servants, watched his comings and goings, and all of his letters were read and resealed. At the same time, anonymous denunciations flooded in against Foscarini, posted into mailboxes specifically set up to allow citizens to inform on one another. By 1622, the council believed that they had enough evidence to make a case against the hapless ambassador. He was put on trial, a closed trial, for revealing state secrets to foreigners, and then he was hanged. But Foscarini had been so well liked that a number of Venetian senators had taken up his cause after his death. An investigation turned the eyes of the Council of Ten on itself. It turned out that Foscarini's letters to England, which the Council's cipher office had said contained encrypted comms, were nothing of the sort. Just friends catching up. Those informants, they were in the pay of rival noblemen, who despised Foscarini for his friendly attitude to Protestant England. Those anonymous denunciations, well, see above. 2 years after his hanging, the council formally exonerated Antonio Foscarini. Not that it did him much good. But why am I telling you this? Well, it's because no matter how sophisticated one's counterintelligence operation is, it's always susceptible to overreach and to political manipulation if its power is absolute. In the modern era, we might think of the countries that found themselves behind the USSR's Iron Curtain after World War II, places like Czechoslovakia, Poland, East Germany, and of course Russia itself, where citizens lived in fear of powerful secret police and spy catchers, and were also encouraged to inform on each other. But as far as Russia goes, this style of counterintelligence work wasn't a 20th century invention. It goes back a very, very long way. At the beginning of the 18th century, Russia was a country in the midst of a transformation. The Tsar, Peter the Great, was a relentless modernizer, determined to drag his country out of the Middle Ages and bring it up to speed with other European powers at the time. Part of that strategy was to import engineers and other workers from those very powers, and this foreign expertise would help to build Peter's new vision for Russia. But that strategy came with risks. How could the Tsar prevent Russian military secrets leaking back to those experts' countries of origin? Peter's answer was the Preobrazhensky Prikaz, a state office devoted to security, internal surveillance, and counterintelligence. Its agents prowled naval shipyards, fortifications, and arsenals, keeping a watchful eye for any illicit communications or suspicious behaviour. Its methods built on those of an even earlier organisation, the Oprichniki, who were a kind of secret police come personal bodyguard service set up by Ivan the Terrible in the 16th century, with a mission to identify and eliminate traitors, conspirators, and foreign sympathisers within the Russian nobility. But it's the Preobrazhensky Prikaz which gives us an early example of institutionalised counterintelligence, the kind we'd almost recognise today. And it helped to set the stage for Russia's long history of, shall we say, vigorous state security. Throughout the rest of the 18th century, Peter the Great's successors carried his torch. After him, Empress Anna Ivanovna's secret chancellery continued to monitor nobles, soldiers, and foreign visitors. When Russian peasants revolted in 1773, Catherine the Great's secret expedition of the Senate tracked messages, informants, and sympathisers throughout the country. Then in 1826, Tsar Nicholas I established the third section of His Imperial Majesty's own chancellery, and as the 19th century wore on, its powers grew, monitoring new technologies like the telegraph. And it needed to, because revolution was brewing. By the 1880s, it was the turn of the Okhrana, a truly modern intelligence agency, to take the stage. It was properly international, with representatives across Europe, anywhere where anti-Tsarist thought might be brewing. But regardless, we know what happened next. In the 20th century, the Bolshevik Revolution transformed Russia in ways that Peter the Great could only have dreamed of, and they wouldn't have been good dreams either.
Cooler days call for layers that last, and Quince is my go-to for quality essentials that feel cosy, look refined, and won't blow your budget. Fall is here. And with it, that familiar question, what on earth did I wear last year? If you're keen to give your wardrobe a refresher without spending a fortune, Quince is the answer. Quince offers luxurious pieces at prices that feel almost too good to be true. From Mongolian cashmere jumpers to Italian leather jackets, their pieces are warm, comfortable, and beautifully made. I've just added one of Quince's cashmere jumpers to my wardrobe, and I honestly couldn't be more delighted. It's beautifully soft, lightweight yet warm, and drapes in that effortless way only proper cashmere does. Truly, it's one of those rare finds that's both luxurious and sensible. A little everyday elegance. Find your fall staples at Quince. Go to quince.com/truespies for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. Now available in Canada, too. That's QUINCE.com/truespies to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/truespies.
It's Halloween on Disney+. Watch frightful family favorites like Hocus Pocus and Tim Burton's The Nightmare Before Christmas on Disney+.
I am the Pumpkin King!
Then take the terror to 10 with a thrilling new remake of The Hand That Rocks the Cradle, Scream, and more with Halloween on Disney+. All these and more screaming this Halloween season with Hulu on Disney+. Bundle subscription required. 18+. Select Hulu content via Disney+. Additional content on Hulu app. Terms apply. Visit disneyplus.com/Hulu for details.
The Russian Revolution of 1917 swept away centuries of aristocratic rule. But the new Soviet Union, led by Vladimir Lenin, knew that their position was fragile. So they established their own secret police/intelligence service, the Cheka, to put paid to any counter-revolutionary ideas. Now more than ever, solid counterintelligence was key. And one of the best examples of how they put it into practice is the Cheka's response to the Lockhart plot.
Lockhart, Robert Bruce Lockhart, by this stage has gathered around him a whole network of spies, diplomats, and various other adventurous souls who are looking at the situation and thinking to themselves, well, the only way that we can get the Russian state back in the war is to put someone else in charge of that state.
Robert Bruce Lockhart was a British diplomat who was posted to Russia in 1918. His mission had been to ensure that the new Bolshevik regime continued to fight against Germany in the First World War. But that hadn't happened. They'd pulled out. So he began putting together a network of counter-revolutionaries who could pave the way for an Allied reinvasion of Russia and a return to a more favourable regime.
And it's from that web of plotting and conspiracy and intelligence gathering that Lockhart develops what becomes known as the Lockhart plot.
That's the voice, by the way, of Professor James Crossland. He was our guide to the True Spies episode, Britain's Agent. Unfortunately for the agent in question, and that's Lockhart, the Cheka were more than a match for him.
So Jakob Peters is the deputy head of the Cheka, and in April of 1918, Peters arrives at Lockhart's hotel suite. He says, get in the car, basically. We're going to go for a drive, which is never a good thing to hear from a Chekist. Lockhart has got no option but to comply, and what ends up happening is he's taken on this, murderous tour through these various sites of massacre across Moscow, where the Chekists have gone in, they've shot up these houses that were full of anarchists or socialist revolutionaries, other counter-revolutionary forces that were deemed to be criminal elements plotting against the state, and Peters is showing Lockhart the bodies.
Listening to that now, it was an obvious warning from the Cheka, who, it turns out, had already established surveillance on Lockhart.
It does seem that at about this time, the Cheka do start tapping his phone and tapping his communications. So at the precise moment when he's starting to pass information to these counter-revolutionary groups, starting to pass money to some of these counter-revolutionary groups, the Cheka are onto him. And this was a warning to knock it off, which of course he did not.
Lockhart and his co-conspirator, an MI6 agent called Sidney Riley, continued plotting.
Riley in particular hones in on this elite brigade of the Red Army called the Latvian Riflemen, two members of which have offered to defect and to help out any Allied landing by encouraging their units to lay down arms and let the Allies roll on through. They give this information to Riley. Riley takes this information to Lockhart, and the two of them enter into this series of meetings with these Latvian riflemen.
But little did they know, they'd already been outplayed. The head of the Cheka, a man called Felix Dzerzhinsky, was already in on the plan.
And it's Dzerzhinsky who sends these two members of the Latvian Rifle Brigade as agents provocateurs, basically, to make contact with the British. And it does seem that what Jasinski was trying to do was to tease out how large a network the Allies had formed against the Bolsheviks, how many spies there were, how many informers there were, what other plans there were beyond this. Were there plans, for example, to execute or assassinate members of the Bolshevik regime? How much was this operation coordinated with the intended Allied landings in Russia? Jasinski was on a fact-finding mission, and he was trying to use these men to find those facts.
A particularly subtle counterintelligence play, but the gloves were about to come off. On the 30th of August 1918, the head of the Petrograd Cheka, Moisei Uritsky, was publicly assassinated.
Not long before there's an attempt on Lenin's life at the armaments factory south of Moscow. These two events are drawn together by the Cheka. They look at them as being related. They then compare this to what the intelligence that's being gathered through the Latvian riflemen about the size and reach of Lockhart and Riley's network and their intent. And Jasinski reaches the conclusion that these assassinations, these targeted killings, are the precursor to a wider coup, and that coup is imminent.
The very next day, the Cheka raided the British embassy.
There's a gunfight there with the British military attaché. This is a gross violation of international law. This is Russian troops going onto British territory, and on top of that, they murder a British embassy staffer.
Lockhart was arrested too. The plot was smashed, and the Cheka, that fearsome organ of the Russian state, continued its work. In later decades, it, like its predecessors, evolved, becoming the NKVD, the KGB, the FSK, and eventually the FSB. Putin's feared spy agency is just the latest in a long line of Russian organizations that have their roots in the counterintelligence efforts of centuries past. Tsarist, Marxist, or capitalist, their aims are the same: to identify and counter threats to the state by any means necessary. During the Cold War, technology became an ever more integral part of spy catching. Scientific minds worked hard to develop new ways to intercept communications, which had always been foundational to counterintelligence work. But there was still a perceived need for counterintelligence officers to get their hands dirty, to catch the enemy unawares when he was sure that he was safe, in private.
Wright was a boffin. He was a largely self-taught but genuinely innovative scientist. He began, at its request, working for MI5 on a part-time, entirely free basis. Finally, in 1955, MI5 came to the belated realization that it actually needed a scientific officer in-house. So it hired Wright as its first ever scientific officer.
In the True Spies episode To Catch a Spy, journalist Tim Tate told the story of Peter Wright, the obsessive British spy catcher who was determined to reveal the extent of Soviet penetration in the United Kingdom. As chief scientific officer, Wright overhauled the way that MI5, Britain's domestic security service, approached the nitty-gritty of counterintelligence work.
He described the service he joined as being covered by a thick film of wartime dust, and he set about reinventing it and bringing it, kicking and screaming, into the new battleground of the Cold War.
One of Wright's innovations was the use of reel-to-reel tape recorders, which allowed MI5 to capture more audio in better quality from its bugs.
The problem, which followed, was that once you improve, as he did, the surveillance techniques, what you discover is that Soviet intelligence was miles ahead of British intelligence, and that it had spies literally all over London, some undercover, some working under embassy cover.
Wright discovered that the problem was far worse than anyone had suspected, and mole hunting became his full-time job.
They broke into embassies, Soviet bloc embassies, so you could say, well, he's doing the nation's business. They broke into houses next door to embassies. MI5 had an in-house burglary expert, a man whose basement was literally lined, the walls were lined with keys that had been acquired, often in somewhat dubious circumstances. which enabled break-ins. When they couldn't use the keys, they picked locks. They burgled wherever they needed to, and they did so without any legal justification.
As we've seen in our other examples, paranoia, however justified, can lead to ethical lines being crossed. And in his later years, Wright would regret this aspect of his work, releasing a controversial tell-all book called Spycatcher, which the British government tried desperately to suppress, by the way. But in the world of espionage, it is pretty feasible that someone really is out to get you. And in 2007, the FBI knew that one such person was passing state secrets to the Cubans, and had been for years. But for the life of them, they couldn't figure out who. Enter Robert Booth, a retiree from the State Department's Office of Counterintelligence. The Bureau needed his expertise to crack the case, so he set to work, rifling through a list of suspects in search of a Cuban connection. 10 days later, he'd found one, and it belonged to a man called Kendall Myers. Myers had been a State Department official too, but by the time Robert came on board, he was semi-retired, teaching at a university and spending rather a lot of time on his yacht. So they were unlikely to catch him in the act of spying for Castro, but Robert Booth had a plan to fool Myers into revealing himself.
We would employ what's called a false flag operation. And a false flag means someone would approach Kendall claiming he's a Cuban when in fact he's an asset of the U.S. intelligence community. When it was all agreed that we believe Kendall might be susceptible to a false flag, a individual, an asset of the intelligence community, posed as a Cuban intelligence officer, approached him on the campus of Johns Hopkins University where Kendall was teaching, offered him a Cohiba cigar, and said a pass code word, which Kendall then accepted as being genuine, could only come from a genuine intelligence officer, and agreed to meet for a drink after class at a hotel close to the Johns Hopkins University campus. And we were listening in on this, and we all just looked at each other and said, he's admitting it. He's acknowledging a clandestine relationship with a suspected Cuban asset, talking to this Cuban asset about his career as a spy. It may not have been enough to prosecute, but for us, we knew we finally had him.
It's a masterclass in counterintelligence tradecraft, and eventually Robert and the FBI got their man. Kendall Myers was sentenced to life in prison in 2010. You can hear the whole story in the True Spies episode, The Spycatcher. It might strike you, listening to this brief history, that while the breadth of counterintelligence history is broad indeed, things haven't really changed that much. Transpose Robert Booth's false flag sting into Renaissance Venice, and with a few adjustments, you can probably imagine it going much the same way. Although a detainee of the Council of Ten would think an American supermax prison was fairly cushy by comparison. But wherever you find yourself in time and space, communications are being intercepted, suspects are being interrogated, and cunning double plays are put in place. That's because while technology moves on, people in the past were working with similar methods, drawing on the same baseline of human ingenuity. And there will always be a place for human spies. But as our technological progress snowballs in the 21st century, the game as a whole is changing. You can't talk about the future of espionage without talking about AI. These new tools create new threats. It's relatively easy to ask an AI model to program a hack that could bypass a nation's state security. It's even easier to use it to mount hostile information operations at a scale that would have been unthinkable even a decade ago. That's what the new generation of counterintelligence officers will have to, counter. They'll have to fight AI with AI, developing their own models that can detect and shut down those attempts to steal secrets and manipulate the public. Because as we've learned, a human spy ring can be detected and broken. But when your own people are turned against you, when your own systems give up the goods, the battle is all but lost. I hope you've enjoyed this short, sharp plunge into the history of counterintelligence. As ever, there's so much more to learn, and if you're interested in doing that, I'd suggest looking up the Frumentari, ancient Rome's proto-secret police, and the beginnings of American counterintelligence during the Civil War with the Pinkerton Agency. It really is a fascinating read. And if you'd like to hear more True Spies content a week early and ad-free, be sure to subscribe to SPYSCAPE Plus at plus.spyscape.com.
Hey folks, get ready for a new season of Blowback coming Monday, September 22nd. This time around, we're covering the Cold War showdown in Africa.
When apartheid South Africa invades the newly independent nation of Angola, revolutionary Cuba sends its own army to defend its African ally, while the United States backs a warlord whose only goal is power.
Subscribe now at blowback.show and get the entire season when it drops, ad-free. Blowback.show.
Josie, it's your new nanny, Polly.
The Hand That Rocks the Cradle, a Hulu original.
What do you know about her?
Now streaming.
You think if you try hard enough, you can stop bad things from happening, but you can't.
Good help.
Get out!
Is hard to find.
No! You made me do this.
A Hulu original. The Hand That Rocks the Cradle. Rated R. Now streaming on Hulu and Hulu on Disney Plus. For bundled subscribers. Terms apply.